Welcome to another one of my painting demos or tutorials. If you want to paint with me, grab your paints. On my daily ride in the bike, I have beautiful views of the sunrises, and in this particular day, coming through the park, I saw this beautiful bright light. The photo doesn't really grab the sense of the light that I was seeing, but it gave me a very good reference for making a painting. So join me in this journey painting this view. I use water-soluble oils, and to dilute the oils, I use the Artisan Winsor Newton Linseed oil. I don't use this that much. Most of the painting is just done at the beginning with water because they're water soluble to create the first washes. And as I apply more and more layers, is basically the paint direct. I only use the linseed oil when the paint is not grabbing the canvas as it should, and then I put a little bit of this linseed oil. The paints that I used, the colors that I used, are the Lucas Berlin 20 ml set. This set comes with titanium white, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow hue, yellow ochre, vermilion hue, alizarin crimson hue, cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, viridian hue, and burnt umber. I really like this set. I love working with the artisan sets also, but I've been using the Lucas Berlin lately. To create this image, I began working on a canvas panel. It's 12 by 16. This is a very nice canvas panel. It's the first time I use it, and it was oil primed. No, I think it's primed for everything, acrylics or oils, but it really felt very smooth and nice on the surface to apply the paint. And I use my favorite brushes. They are the Simply Simmons. These Simply Simmons are actually synthetic brushes, and I use them for most of the painting. I only use the Mimic Hogs when I need to get rid of paint, and they're very good at scraping the surface. And because these are water-soluble oils, you can do it just with the water when you need to get rid of a particular paint that you applied, or you need to clear it up so you make the image lighter. I actually started by applying some color in the canvas so that I won't be painting on white. Beginning with yellow ochre in most of the panel, I also added a bit of the darker yellow ochre with a mix of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. And then the violets for the areas that I knew wanted to be in the shadow or more shaded. It's alizarin crimson, viridian green, and titanium white. For the line drawing, I used the same alizarin crimson, viridian green, and less titanium white. In some areas, no titanium white at all, for placing the lines of the drawing where the basic shapes were going to be. Now I want to talk a bit about purple or violet. I use alizarin crimson mixed with cerulean blue gives a beautiful saturated violet. With ultramarine blue is less saturated, and my preferred violet is really with viridian hue. This combination is really gorgeous, and it's very dark when you don't add any white. You can also make purples or violets with the vermilion hue and cerulean blue and ultramarine blue. The combination in this particular set in my hands with viridian hue and vermilion don't work. It looks like a dirty brown. So make your own violets, play with them, and see which combination you like the best. So going back to the line drawing, I was really happy with the placement of my elements and my shapes, and I did make a very good note of the key areas where the brightest lights were going to be. Of course, the sky, the triangle I thought was a very important element, that triangle that I wanted to accentuate in my painting on the bench. And then where the light's coming on the floor, it's also an important way to provide the perspective. So I was very happy with my line drawing. So now that I had the line drawing, I wanted to make sure that the perspective was correct. Let's take a look. The top of the wall in the back is not really at the middle of the panel. The top of the wall on the other hand, because there's a perspective, it's a little lower. And then where is the top of the bench? Back. Other lines that were important is where that wall ends on the left of the canvas. And then on the other side of the back of the other bench, where does that hit? The bottom of the bench, and then the seat of the bench, where should that go? Those were important points that allow me to know how good or bad the drawing is and which things I had to correct. And of course, where the brightest light should be. Well, I hit none of those points. My beautiful line drawing was completely wrong. You can pause the video and you can actually check each one of them, but believe me, I was way off. This is where the mimic hog brushes came very handy, so I wiped out everything I had done and I started from the beginning. What I did was to turn things upside down. I realized that by me thinking that I knew what I was painting, instead of painting what I was just seeing, I was conceptualizing, and it was not working well. So turning upside down is a very good way that I have found for improving my drawing. So let's try it together. First, I divided the photo in 8 rectangles, placing in each one of the rectangles what I saw. So what I mean by this is, in this case, I am seeing the area on the bench. I'm seeing this trapezoid, just looking at the particular top left rectangle, and that's what I am actually placing. In this case, I used an orange oil pastel. And the reason why I did not use the violet anymore is because I could still see some of my original drawing. So I used a different color to correct my drawing. So let's move on to the next rectangle. Same thing, just what you see in that particular area, in that particular rectangle, just make sure that you know how to place it and where to place it. So just place the lines without really knowing very well what you are placing in there. Like, this triangle, is it in the right place? Is it of the right shape and size? Is this particular line where the bench is going, is the angle correct? Is it starting and ending where it should? I don't have it placed correctly at the center the same way, but it's following a better shape than before. Continuing with that tree and the trunk of that tree, going down and then placing the other areas. Again, I don't want to conceptualize that these are benches. I prefer not to think of them as benches, just lines that I have to put in each one of the rectangles, what's in the rectangle. Moving on to the next one, placing the key tree and also the light, the street light, in the right place, and the wall. So I try not to think what they are, just look at the lines and place them correctly in the rectangle. Continue until I end. So I ended up having this line drawing that is correcting the mistakes that I had from before, and it has a better placement, not perfect, but better placement than before. So now what I did was basically using my alizarin crimson Viridian green with a touch of white and different amounts of water, just place the darks where the darks go and make sure that I started working on the shaded areas, leave the light areas with no paint, and then start making some of the elements that produce the shapes that we are seeing. But again, upside down, because I did not want to confuse my brain by thinking that I know what I'm painting. I prefer just to paint what I see, not what I know it's there. An example of what I'm trying to explain is, for instance, this area of the dark and that the trees are creating. So in here you can see that area of dark, and it's reflected in that area of the dark. And if I'm looking at it upside down, do the same with the dark areas in the back foliage, and just try to follow the shapes in general. Try to follow where the lines are and where the shapes are. So when I turned it upside down, I was happy. It looked much better than before. I think the proportions are better, and then I can continue working on the painting. So let's begin adding color. First thing is continue using your violets. It's the alizarin crimson, viridian green, and different amounts of titanium white. Use your brush strokes to create the different shades and shadows. A lighter violet is used for the back of that wall. Even though in the photo it looks the same, as dark as the trunk of the tree, I knew that in real life, the perspective, the atmospheric perspective pushed it really farther, and it should be lighter. Sometimes photographs do not reflect what we see there. Fortunately, I had been there when I started the painting. I had just come back from seeing this, and I still had in my mind the way it looked. There was something that was happening, and I did not realize until later, which is there's a street light that is actually a bit crooked here at the right hand side here. I think now you can see it. It's a light, but because it's a street light that it's crooked, I actually thought it was a tree, and I painted it as a tree. That's okay. No problem with that. You can change it. You can make it a light if you're making your own painting, or you can leave it as a tree. So for that lighter shade, I use the same mixture with more titanium white. The areas that have the light coming in, like you see with brush strokes and painting those lighter areas, is basically yellow ochre. It's not very bright. In some cases, I added maybe a little bit of white, but in others, I added more of alizarin crimson. And in this particular area, I have more yellow ochre and alizarin crimson with a touch of ultramarine blue. And that's, for instance, in the bottom left, that's what actually gives you the impression of light seeping through, like dappled light. But it's darker than the lightest light, which is at the back. This particular purple is a darker alizarin crimson with viridian green, and it has more alizarin crimson in the mix than the previous one. So it's a little bit warmer, and I did that because I thought in the picture, even though it didn't look that dark, I wanted to make it darker, but I also wanted to make it warm. For the greens, there's a lot of videos and a lot of books that explain to you mixing greens. I actually haven't found much trouble using yellow ochre and the viridian green. You can use burnt sienna, you can use the burnt umber, you can use alizarin crimson in the mix. You can put almost everything to the greens. My base is yellow ochre and viridian green. Viridian green is not a very natural green, but with the yellow ochre, it mutes it and it provides a very nice green as my base green. In some cases, you will see that I add a bit more blue. So I add some ultramarine blue or more viridian green that has a blue hue in some areas, and in some others I added some white or sometimes a bit more of the yellow. So depending on the areas, you start building all of that sense of foliage around it with different greens. For the light area, that's cadmium yellow right out of the tube and the vermilion hue. And I knew that was an area that I had to work a bit more because it's, to me, it's like the focal point. So what I did next in terms of the colors was to work a bit more on several definitions. And one of them is this cadmium yellow with white for the rest of the reflection. It is important that in this reflection, I also used vermilion hue on top of the branches of the tree so that it gave a orangey tone. And I also created some just general brush strokes behind the tree on the right top of the painting so that it gave the impression of the light coming through. I, again, did not realize until I was painting this that in the original photo, what we see behind that tree is actually the street light, because I was coming back home and they were still on. This was about maybe 5:45 in the morning and they were still on, but I liked it as a reflection of the natural light, so that's why it, in contrast with the trunk, it gives a very nice impression of light. I used the mixture of this yellow ochre, viridian green, and a little bit of white, maybe with a bit of cadmium yellow for the lightest areas. It's not really a very bright light area for the trees. I did not want to make it a very bright green. I wanted to have the painting more focused on the bench. Now, I also did what's called negative painting, or some people like to say they paint the sky holes. So as you go from the center of the brightest sunlight, which is cadmium yellow and white, and you move up and left and up and right, the sky is becoming more and more blue, but it's a lot of white with just a tiny bit of blue. And that transition is happening really quickly. And that's how you paint around your dark areas that you had before, and you paint the sky holes. You just need to make sure that you follow more or less the same view that you had before, but it doesn't have to actually match the photograph. I used again this alizarin crimson and viridian green, which was the darker combination for defining a bit better those shaded areas. I decided that my bench, actually I liked it on violets and purples instead of making them gray-brown as the original ones. And I wanted to keep them that way. Originally, I had thought of matching the color better, but I really liked the contrast of the violet with the yellow. And I just made it with some areas that have different mix of whites or blues in there. And so it's not all the straight color and not filling it up completely, but it's just different kinds of brush strokes. Also note that I worked on the trunk of the tree that's closer to us in this area with some reflective light on the edges so that it would look like it's against the light. For the brightest area on the bench is basically yellow ochre with a bit of white. There's no cadmium yellow there. And this is the final painting. I was pondering if I should work a bit more on it, but I've been looking at it for some time The shades look okay. I like the way it looks, and it's very creative and imaginatively called Park Bench, and it's an oil on prime canvas panel, 12 by 16 inches, and it was painted by me in June 2020. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you want to paint with me, or you want to paint something similar, and if not, please take a look at my channel. There's other videos that you might find interesting and entertaining. Thank you very much.